Today, what we're going to talk about is what auditory processing is and what it affects, what can cause poor auditory processing, and what people can do to overcome auditory processing issues. That has become important to me within the last year when I started noticing these things, and somebody just mentioned it to me. So then I,
Mhm,
I dug into it a little bit and I thought, oh my God, that's totally me. I never knew about this thing. And it's huge
mhm.
and it's so complex too that I think more people should know about it. So I'm really excited to share what you do with everybody, and especially because of what I do. It's often the case that you have a lot of information in English, but not always in other languages, particularly with
Mhm.
medical related things. And
Right,
so I feel like it's really important that we bring that to people whose first language isn't English because it might be actually much harder for them to find that. And it
right.
might be there as well. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, totally.
I myself, I'm pretty sure that I have some issues around this, so it really hits home with me personally because I know I need to inform myself a lot more about it, and I know a lot of people that I work with or that follow me, they might have these issues too and not even know about it. First, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to this point and what your passions are?
Yeah, totally. So to try to make without telling you a entire life story, I'm a former teacher and I was super frustrated with the school system and basically was teaching grade 7 and 8 and just saw a lot of kids who by the time they'd reached grade 8 had had IEPs and accommodations and, diagnoses from the time they were 6, 7, 8 years old and we're really making minimal progress. And I was basically, went through the same training as every other teacher, and it was kind of these kids just have to learn how to manage these conditions and so forth. But I started going down a rabbit hole whenever I started. I have always had an interest in neuroscience and so forth. And then my daughter became sick. I won't go into too much detail about that, but it involved a neuroimmune condition where a lot of different functions were affected. And so I was almost kind of forced down a rabbit hole of how different factors like nutrition, gut health, and also our different connections in our brain all impact how well we learn, self regulate our emotions, our speech, our listening abilities, all of that. And I was blown away to learn there is decades and decades of research to show how the brain can change and that a lot of the things that we think are just conditions we have to manage can actually be overcome. Um, and so slowly I started to make my way into a new career. And here I am today, where I specialize in working with people who have learning. I say behavior, but really attention, self regulation issues is really what they are. Um, and to help them actually overcome that as opposed to just managing that. So,
Wow, wow. It's so funny how
yeah,
life takes us on these different paths and we end up in a place where we
yes,
never thought we were gonna be. Yeah, definitely,
100%.
definitely. Wow,
Yeah.
yeah, it's very interesting. And for me, a lot of the people that I talk to, obviously English isn't their first language. So at any point, did you ever talk to people who were not only struggling with the language, but maybe had something else going on as well?
Totally. Both in the past and to this day, I work with people who have multiple issues or layers that are going on, whether it's people who English is not their first language and they have a learning disability or a speech issue or attention issue. Um, and then also add to that, what I find is that people think that their issues are separate and they're often linked. So just a random kind of example is one of the questions I'll ask parents whenever I first meet them is, "Does your child have any skin issues or gut issues?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, what does this have to do with their learning difficulty?" Right? Like, what does eczema have to do with auditory processing? But I would say, like, I don't know, probably like 70% of my clients have some kind of skin issue like eczema and so forth, and that has a lot to do with auditory processing. So
What?
a lot of the time, our separate issues aren't as separate as we think. And,
Mm.
mom's going maybe taking her son to a dermatologist and taking her child here for this problem and this problem when they're all connected to causing overall breakdown biochemically with the brain. So, yeah.
Mhm, mhm, and I didn't even know this about you, and when we first started talking, I said, "Oh, what did you have for lunch or breakfast?" And you said sauerkraut, and I'm like, "No way, I eat sauerkraut too because I have an autoimmune issue." So I'm on this thing called the autoimmune protocol where I'm trying to find out kind of what I'm eating that might be causing other issues. So maybe it turns
Right.
out that something that I am eating might be related to some of my auditory processing. Although also, I don't know if I told you this already, but I had a brain tumor several years ago,
Okay.
And so,
Right.
the nerve is completely gone on this side, and I'm deaf
Okay.
completely in this ear. So I don't know if that had something to do with it before. I really can't quite remember if I had auditory processing issues before that, but I find myself, saying "what" a lot and taking longer. I always have the subtitles on. There are definitely things there that made me think,
Mhm.
"Oh, I didn't know about this, but this is a thing, and this might be me too." So other people have found that there are other things going on that may or they don't think are related, but in fact are related. Eczema is one of
Right.
them. Are there some other things that you could tell us that might be something that you've noticed in the past about people and patterns?
Totally.
Mhm.
So auditory processing, there's several factors that are occurring when kids have or people have auditory processing issues. And it doesn't mean that they have all of those factors, but they're the factors that we definitely want to look at. And so the first place I always start is what I call the biology of learning or the biochemistry of learning. And as a functional nutritionist, that basically involves looking at things like number one, toxicity. So, heavy metal toxicity is a factor. It actually will damage the auditory nerve, is particularly sensitive to heavy metals, and it can damage the auditory nerve. So, one of the things we do is we might look at, is there heavy metal toxicity? Do we need to work on, gently draining and detoxing and then healing the auditory nerve so that functions better? Another thing that is a big one is food sensitivity. So the minute I have a kid who has auditory processing disorder, one of the first things I will look at is sensitivities to dairy.
Mm.
Um, that one is number one allergen period, but it's just a mucusy food, so
Mhm.
it's going to affect, the whole auditory system a lot more. But anything that is inflammatory to the body can affect the auditory processing. And so, whether it's gluten for this person, corn for another, so we want to look at, is food sensitivities playing a role? So, those are the two big ones in terms of biochemical, but other things are, if I'm working with someone who either they're a child or an adult, but they have a history of ear infections.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be a ton of ear infections. A lot of people will say, "Oh, I've only had like 2, and no, it wasn't a big deal." But what the research shows is that someone could even just have one bad ear infection and it can damage the cilia in their ear, and that's going to affect their auditory processing. The good news is we can heal the cilia in
Mhm.
the ear with certain protocols and nutrition and so forth. So, those are the three kind of big biochemical ones that have a big impact that I like to look at as factors. And then other factors with auditory processing are things like, um, so the first one is retained primitive reflexes, which, unless you have a child with special needs and you've been going through this a long time, you probably haven't heard of this.
Mhm.
And yet, if anyone who's a mom who's had a baby, totally has seen this. So, if you remember, whenever you have been around a newborn or your own baby, they will do things like you put your, index finger in the palm of their hand and they wrap their fingers automatically around
Mm.
the pinky and you think, "Oh my goodness, they love me so much." No, they don't. Yeah, they totally do, but that is what we call the Palmar reflex. And
Mm.
so another example is we put our baby on the change table on their back and they fling their arms and legs out like a starfish.
Mhm.
So we have all kinds of reflexes and they're there, number one, to keep us alive, and number two, to help with brain development. However, they should integrate, meaning disappear, basically meaning integrate into the nervous system by 3 years of age, but typically much sooner. If they do not, then it hinders brain development of certain areas of the brain, depending on how many reflexes are retained, which ones are retained, and other factors that are at play. So there are certain retained reflexes that will affect auditory processing in terms of the auditory cortex in the brain.
Hmm.
Yeah, so super fascinating. So one of the things that I do with clients in my program is we work on integrating those reflexes after we've gone through the biochemical piece. And the research shows that almost always when there's auditory processing, there's almost always retained reflexes. So I would say that is definitely one that you want to be working on if you do have auditory processing.
Mm.
And then the other thing that is huge
Mhm.
is what we call left brain weakness and right brain overdevelopment.
Mhm.
So this is not the same as the debate around right brain dominant,
Mm,
left brain dominant, and does that exist and all of that type of
mhm,
stuff. This is literally on brain scans neurologically. We can look at the brain hemispheres and see that in certain individuals, they have a highly developed right side of their brain and a underdeveloped left side of the brain. So meaning there's not as much electrical activity or connections on
hmm.
that side of the brain. So left side of the brain is where the auditory cortex is.
Ah,
Okay.
now I see the connection here. And would this have
Yeah.
anything to do with if somebody is right-handed or left-handed, or is there no connection there?
Not necessarily. There's more people with dyslexia, like 50% of dyslexics are left-handed.
Mm,
And there is a lot of people with auditory processing who have dyslexia. It's often a component of
mhm,
dyslexia.
mhm,
So it could be, but it's definitely not like a determining
mhm,
factor.
mhm,
Want to say that's for sure the case.
mm,
But what I find really interesting is in connection to some of the work that you do is you're
mhm,
probably working with a lot of artists,
mm,
people who have that artist brain, right?
mhm,
So a lot of the kids and adults I work with who have a left brain weakness, who have auditory processing issues, are these super creative,
mhm,
imaginative people. They're really good at the arts. So they have this, that's their zone of genius. They have this beautifully overdeveloped right brain. That's where they have those gifts, but they
mhm,
have this weak left brain and they have this auditory cortex that is really needing some more connection. So
mhm,
another program is we stimulate the weaker side of the brain, the left side of the brain, and so forth, to get more connectivity with the auditory cortex. So that's for the most part the big things that we look when there's auditory processing issues. So as you can see, it's multi therapy, if you will, the biochemistry, and then we call the functional neurology. So meaning the actual connections in the brain that could be impacting, someone's ability.
No kidding, because I've been speaking with you for about 5 minutes, and already you've
Mhm.
exploded my brain about all this, and so much that I didn't know, even though I knew it existed at least, right? I kinda stuck my toes in the water a little bit, but I had no idea about all these interconnected things or things you wouldn't think of. So I definitely
Right.
wanna hear more about your program later and let people know how you can help people. But can we back up first, and can we kind of
Totally.
just talk about what auditory processing is? Maybe talk a little bit more about the label itself, or how should we think about it and some things like that. Can we back up for that?
Yeah, totally.
Awesome.
So basically, auditory processing, first of all, it can present differently in different people, right? It's like anything. I mean, you have an autoimmune condition, so
Mhm,
you know what I'm talking about in terms of it can look, in 10 different ways for different people. So, um, some of the symptoms, though, that can appear typically are things like one of the big ones that I see with a lot of people with auditory processing disorder is a hard time following multi step instruction,
mm,
particularly when doing orally.
mhm,
So, if I'm dealing with a child, I'll say, Mom, can, little Johnny follow instructions if you say, I want you to take a shower, brush your teeth, go eat breakfast, and then pack your bag? And they're like, nope.
gone after
Like he
shower.
can't. Yeah, exactly. Can remember the
Mhm,
first instruction.
mhm,
So that's a big one. Another one is saying huh or what a lot. So your hearing is fine,
guilty.
right? Yeah.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
hearing is fine, but it's like the processing of the information for your brain to understand the meaning of
mhm,
it
mhm.
is a little bit slower. So then that's where we say huh or what. That gives us time to process. And then sometimes the person repeats the question and you're already answering it before they finish
Yes.
repeating the question because now you've
Yes.
had time to process,
Exactly.
right?
I would use it as a stalling technique sometimes, and not only in English,
Yes.
in situations where I was speaking in another language, because that gave me time literally to process the question. And I knew there was sound there. I don't know how to quite to describe it. I knew there was sound there. I knew I was hearing something, but I didn't know what it was. Or sometimes I could pick out the main words, and I was trying to decide, was that a
Mm.
question? And you're trying to think of somebody's intonation at the same time, and maybe cultural differences. And so it's a lot of layers. And to break it down, it wasn't that I wasn't listening to you. I'm sorry. I was absolutely listening. I'm just getting there a little bit slower, you know? Yeah, so
Yeah,
I'd have trouble with that.
exactly. Yep. Often, people have issues with focus. Again, particularly if they're in a situation, like I encountered this a lot with university or college students, where they're like 3-hour lecture. Just having
Mm.
to listen and use my auditory system for 3 hours,
Mm.
they feel like their brain is gonna explode. They can only
Mhm.
take in so much auditory information. And I wanna add to that, I actually had a man come to see me, he was probably 58, 59, a few years ago, and he said that it was affecting his marriage because he felt like, I mean, women always have this running joke that, man, it goes through one ear and out the other. But he was like, this is serious. He's like, my wife thinks that I really don't care. I'm not paying attention, but he's like, she talks. And I literally tap out. I can't take in too much
Mm.
auditory information. And he was an engineer, so super smart, but he's like, it affected his ability to do his job well as
Mm.
well. There were certain things that really impacted him as a engineer. And he was like, I don't care if I'm 58. I want to fix this, even if it's just for my relationship. So it's not always how it affects our learning or academics or our career. It's also how it affects our relationships, whether it's the child to the parent or the parent to the child or within a, marital relationship and so forth. So,
I have a roommate and yeah, and bless him, he is very patient and he knows about this too, but he gets frustrated sometimes when I say
yep.
what, it's totally understandable. He really likes, I don't know if I told you, I live in Mexico and my roommate is Mexican, but his English is phenomenal. So when we watch things in English, we often have the subtitles on. Not necessarily for him, but for me
Right.
because I
Right.
enjoy having the subtitles on and that's how I'm kind of listening through reading. But I've heard stories of other people who get really frustrated with just having the subtitles on, and they'll just walk out of the room, and they don't wanna participate in sharing that entertainment with the person just because the subtitles are on, and I can see how that would strain a relationship too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of layers to it in terms that go, much further than um, academics are learning, but definitely connected to the academics. When someone is a child, so if I'm working with an adult who has auditory processing disorder, I will ask, like, did you have speech difficulties when you were a child? That's really common. Did you have a hard time learning to read or a hard time blending sounds? Did you have a hard time, rhyming or anything with, putting words together and so forth? And oftentimes there is some of that that's taken place. Some of it's been overcome, some of it's still, an issue. So,
Hmm. That's making me think about, my own issue with this too, and I'm trying to think, like, because of my autoimmune issue, it's a chicken and egg thing, like, I'm trying to now think if when I was a kid, I don't think I had trouble blending sounds, I don't think I had trouble with rhymes, and far from being, let's say, unfocused, I think I had the opposite, and even now, I am hyper focused on what people say,
right.
probably because I need that focus, and so, what I do in my work is, 6 hours a day, I'm usually one-on-one with somebody just really paying attention to what they say and how they say it.
Mhm.
For example, you say processing, and I say processing, right? And I just can't help it anymore, I just pick up
Mhm.
every little thing, but I think it was a coping mechanism. Probably starting
Interesting.
sometime, I'm just guessing, maybe starting when the autoimmunity started. Plus, I have this deafness issue on one side. So, for
Yep.
example, riding in a car, if I'm not the driver, at least if you drive on the, the right side of the road, like in many countries, then if I'm not the driver, I have a really hard time just hearing the driver. Like, let's say the windows are open, that's worse.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
I finally hear it, and then I have to process it too. So, for example, when I'm driving with my roommate and he's saying something, sometimes that's when he gets really frustrated. So I try to notice as much as possible.
Yeah, okay, and I'm so glad you mentioned that because there seems to be 2 spectrums with that where it's either, the person who has auditory processing issues might, um, have what I call the volume turned up really high. So they could
Mhm.
be, say, the kid in the classroom who gets really overwhelmed with too much sound, or the adult who gets overwhelmed with too much sound and is like, "I don't wanna hear anything." When they get home, they don't even wanna drive home with the radio on because they are just they have what I call sensory overload or
Mhm.
auditory overload. And for children, this will look like these are the kids, they come home and they have a meltdown, they're having
Mm.
tantrums because their
Mhm.
system is overloaded. As adults, though, okay, most of us aren't having tantrums, but it can look like anxiety or overwhelm or just
Mm.
not being able to do another thing.
Mhm.
And yes, then there is the other spectrum where they're not as highly attuned to the sounds and they're not picking up on it, like the dyslexic who can't tell the difference between ba and da,
Mhm.
or pa and ba.
Mm.
So, and you're absolutely right. Auditory processing is also very much connected to ADHD and ADD. So there could be the person who has a hard time focusing, or there could be the person who has hyperfocus, or like a lot of people who have ADHD, they have a hard time focusing. But if they're super interested in something, then they have hyperfocus and could zero in all day, right? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Uh-huh. I'm so glad we're talking today because all these things are really ringing true for me, and I hope they're hitting home for other people who are listening too. So we're talking about auditory processing and how there can be issues with that and how it's affecting relationships, how it's affecting ability to study, maybe your focus. What other things do you want to mention about auditory processing and what it affects before we go back to the causes and maybe reiterate some of those causes?
I think we covered it. Like basically the big thing I get a lot of people reaching out to me is, learning and reading is huge. So any kind of history regarding that, definitely a spillover is going to be, affecting your relationships. And of course, that attention and focus piece. So those are the three main pieces that I see occurring. And just one other add-on is another cue that someone might have auditory processing issues is just if they, prefer to learn or access information visually as opposed to just listening. So, I remember when I was teaching and, I even still see this where people are like, "No, I can't just
Mm,
listen to you read that. I need
mhm,
to see it or I need the book in front of me."
mhm,
Um, you know?
mm.
So, yeah, basically they can't just focus on auditory information for any amount of time or they just kind of shut down.
Oh, yeah, those are my subtitles. Give me the slides, give me the give me the book, give me the text
Yeah,
too. It's not to me, it's not too much, it's just an extra channel, and also I'm super
yeah.
kinesthetic as well, so anything you can
Mhm.
give me to touch or hold or manipulate, I'm cool with that, yeah, but auditory only, often I just kind of zone out. I just turn it off and start wandering around inside my own brain. And everything
Yeah.
you've said so far, does any of that only apply to children, or can all of this be applied to adults, and do we have other things to mention for adults as well?
So one other factor that I should mention is head injuries.
Mm,
That obviously that can affect any area of the brain. So, and head injuries, by the way, so as I mentioned, when we're born, we have these primitive reflexes that should integrate in infancy. But because those reflexes are a survival mechanism, if we get a head injury, those reflexes can come back. So we
mm.
might have been a perfectly well developed infant. Everything's fine. And then 21 years old, we get into a car accident. And as a protective mechanism, basically those reflexes will unintegrate. And so you can actually develop issues with auditory processing as an adult or a teen or whatever out of nowhere because of an accident or injury and so forth. So always considering the has there been a head injury, concussion, or something of the sort. And also the other factor is stealth infections, which is
Mhm,
really getting deeper into that functional neurology piece. But as someone who's had Lyme,
mhm,
or chronic Lyme,
mhm.
that can affect a lot. Brain inflammation can affect a lot. We know that food sensitivities on a smaller level, there's that neuroinflammation. So if we're also dealing with things like, Lyme or mold toxicity or any other stealth infection, that can also affect auditory processing and other functions as well.
You are making my day today because I have had Lyme. I grew up in upstate New York, right? So everybody and
Okay.
their brother
Yeah.
has Lyme. So, where are you
Yes.
located? Where are you now?
I'm just like 30 minutes from the upstate New York border. So
Ah,
I'm between Montreal and Ottawa. So yeah.
yes, we used to go to Montreal all the time on the weekends because it
Yeah.
was so close. I don't know if you know Glens Falls. Do you know Queensbury area? Probably
Yes.
not.
Yeah.
Yes, that's my hometown.
Yeah.
So,
Heard of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
Lyme disease rampant. I definitely have
Right.
Lyme disease, and, there was something else you meant. Oh, concussion. I was snowboarding one time, and this person came behind me, totally out of control. All I heard was and then I woke up, who knows how long later, I was soaked, so I was laying in the snow for a while, couldn't move any of my extremities, the person was nowhere there, it was like a Tuesday, nobody else was on the mountain, and yeah, and I after about an hour, I was able to wiggle my I think an hour, able to wiggle my toes and then my feet and finally get down to like a ski station. And, so maybe there's that as well. I also had, like, the brain tumor, so who knows, where all this stuff
Yeah.
comes from. Is there a
Right.
test that people can take? Is there maybe an online survey, at least, where they can get some ideas? And we can put these in the show notes later. You can just say, "Yes, it's available." or like, "No, contact me directly." Is there some way that people can kind of start to self-assess before they come to you?
Yeah, so you know what? I actually don't have a self-assessment for auditory processing, but now you've got me thinking. But I do have an extremely detailed article on my blog on what auditory processing is, and here's the signs and symptoms. So you can definitely, I mean, the more boxes that you're kind of ticking in that
Mm.
list in terms of here
Mhm.
are the symptoms, um, that's more, you can kind of be sure that that's probably a factor at play. And I also want to caution people, I'm not a doctor. And so people will say to me, can you diagnose me with auditory processing and can you find out if I have it or not? And I'll say,
Mm.
no, I can't. But I want to caution people to not get too hung up on the diagnosis. And the reason I say that is I have a lot of parents come to me and they'll be like, well, we got him checked for auditory processing disorder and he doesn't have it, but he has this symptom, this symptom, this symptom. And the way the diagnoses work is like you have to tick so many boxes to hit
Mhm.
that line or threshold of if it's a
Mhm.
diagnosis or not. And if it's not a diagnosis, then it's nothing.
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
where now I'm like, okay, maybe you don't have a learning disability, or maybe you don't have auditory processing disorder, maybe you have a glitch,
Mm. Mhm.
right? That's
You have
still
something to work
impacting.
on. Yeah, you still need
Right.
some help, obviously, you need some support. Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I say that just because I don't know that all of your, clients have insurance, and like from what
Mm.
I understand, most people are paying around $3,000 to $4,000 for these diagnoses, and they're not
Right.
getting that's just for the diagnosis, not for the actual help. So,
Mm.
if you feel like you're ticking all the boxes, and you don't have insurance and that diagnosis isn't going to help you get funding, then it might not be in your economic best interest
Mhm.
to put all your money in getting that label.
Mhm. Okay, so let's start with that then. For
Mhm.
example, I'm living here in Mexico, the healthcare is really quite good, but I
Mhm.
don't there's still a lot of kind of holes that I see. And so I have to say I'm a little bit skeptical that if I were to find somebody here and I ticked all the boxes, blah blah blah, I don't know that I would be able to get the help that I need. Right? Even if I have the money to pay for it. So do you have anything that somebody can do even if they suspect some of these things? Like, where can somebody start even with, let's say, very little money?
Okay, with very little money, first of all, yeah, hop on my website, check and see if you kind of sounds like you have auditory processing disorder. Just go into the blog, type in auditory processing in the search, and you'll find probably more information than you're looking for. That's step 1. The next step, if you don't have a lot of money, I would start with the things that I've mentioned. Like,
Mm,
number 1, do I have food sensitivities that are not being addressed or haven't been identified, I should say? And again, you can pay for a food sensitivity panel through a functional medicine or naturopathic doctor, or
mhm,
functional medicine nutrition myself. But if you can't afford that, do an elimination diet.
mhm,
Eliminate the top foods that are known. You can search that on the internet, the top allergenic foods or food sensitivities. Eliminate those. I would say minimum 6 to 8 weeks, and then you slowly add one in at a time and see the difference.
mhm,
Quick little story. I had a client who they had tried everything for their child's auditory processing disorder. As soon as we removed dairy and gluten, it was like a totally different child, both with focus, attention, reading, everything.
mm.
And to the point where they were like, "Come on," as because dad was super skeptical, like, "How is dairy and gluten doing this?" Right?
Mhm, mhm.
And then, they removed it and were kinda like, "Yeah, no, this can't be this. This, like, gotta be something else." So they added it back in, and within a week and a half, everything slid backwards.
Wow.
And then again, remove the food, totally different child. Is it always that simple? I wish.
Mm.
There's usually multiple layers, but just wanted to share that it's pretty powerful sometimes how much these things can affect the brain. So
No kidding, no kidding. I'm on the,
yeah.
autoimmune protocol right now, which
Hmm.
I'm gonna try to do it a lot of people do it 1 to 3 months from what I've read, and I'm gonna try to do it 6 months so that I can really get, like, well, I hope, more data about how something might affect me when I'm reintroducing it. But I can tell
Yep.
you already that, yeah, crazy as it sounds, it's sometimes true. Well, the reason I started, let me rewind. The reason I started this autoimmune protocol was because of my autoimmune disease, which is Hashimoto's. And I was on the medication, I'm maxed out on the medication. still can't lose weight, still get night sweats, my asthma's terrible. What else? I had knee surgery twice, and that was 3 years ago. My knee still hurts every day, right? So I was really at the end. And I decided to try this because I ate pretty healthy, honestly, before. And
Right.
one thing though, I didn't really eat much meat. I ate a lot of eggs. And pretty much the minute we cut out eggs, and it was just a little test before I did the whole AIP, I was like, I can't believe
Okay.
this. My knee feels better. Can't believe this. My asthma's getting better, right? Mostly just from eggs. And then I think I put eggs back in to play, and I was like, yep, I think it is eggs. At least one thing. So now I'm doing the whole protocol to see if there's anything else that's hiding in there. It could be dairy, it could be gluten, often, very often gluten for people with my
Mhm.
my thing. But yeah, I'm gonna do the whole thing so I can try to weed out as much as possible. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
What else? What else can
Yeah.
people do?
Right. So if you've kind of tackled that, then I mean, the next one is considering if there's heavy metal toxicity. I see that I would say enough in my clients. Like
Mm.
I'm going to see 40-50%. It's pretty
Mhm.
common though, with especially when you're working with learning disabilities, which is not necessarily the case with someone who just has auditory processing. But that's definitely one to tackle, and am going to caution you not to tackle heavy metal detoxification on
Mm.
your own,
Mhm.
um, because it can make things worse if you're not doing things right. The body's, as we know, is extremely wise and will deposit the heavy metals in areas that are less dangerous, like that, and
Mm.
other tissues. So you don't want to start drawing that out and having that circulate in the blood and crossing the blood-brain barrier, unless you're doing this properly to make sure it's actually going through the detox organs. So I will say that one is
Mhm.
definitely not to do it yourself. Um, but even just looking at, am I exposed to heavy metals? Like, what's up with your water? Is whether it's city water or well water? What am I putting on my face every day? What am I washing with? What am I eating? I have a client recently who her 6 or 7-year-old son has insane issues with rage, and they actually lived in the Northern Dominican Republic for 2 years, and, they found out that the pesticides are, in terms of what's legal there is different,
Mhm.
and the child had very high levels of lead and something else anyway,
Mhm.
and, they suspect that it most likely came from living in the Dominican and eating all this food and so forth. There's obviously some
Mm.
other genetic variations at play too that affected his ability to detox.
Mhm.
But so what am I being exposed to? I think is definitely something you want to consider, or what
Mm.
have I been exposed to?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, then as far as the neurological piece or functional neurology piece, finding out, do I have retained primitive reflexes? Is that affecting me? Again, you can find a lot of that on my website, some good
Mhm.
information about the different reflexes and what it affects and so forth. And then stimulating the left side of the brain can definitely be a bit of a trick. There's different tools and so forth to do. But if you kind of just go online, there are things you can do that it will give you some tips. I don't know if it'll be, totally get you over the cliff, but
Mhm.
it'll definitely help. So
Hmm, hmm. So for most people, a really good starting point would be your website, first of all. And I'm gonna
yep,
link that in the show notes, obviously. But can you say the name, spell the name, give us a way to remember how to find you there, and so that we can kind of remember that auditorily, let's say. And then, of course, we'll put the link down below in the show notes too.
totally. So my website is my name, LorraineDriscoll.com. Driscoll like the strawberries.
Mm.
I say that because that just seems to be what people remember.
Let me pause you
Um,
there for a second because let me tell you something. You may not know this. When you buy Driscoll berries of any kind, they come from about an hour of where I live. So right near
oh,
Lake
so
Chapala,
cool.
yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, in Mexico, the biggest lake in the country is called Lake Chapala. And just outside of
Okay.
there, between my city and Guadalajara, and there you drive and you go through all the fields and you'll see all the Driscoll's farms and things like that. And they have planes leaving full of berries every day. So next time you get some berries or you think about your last name, or if you're trying to remember Lorraine's website, remember to have a special rapport with the Driscoll strawberries.
Very cool. Love it. That's awesome. Um, or you can just type in building better brains into Google and my website is what
Nice.
pops up.
Building better brains. Excellent. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So let's just make sure that we've got all the bases covered, right? We talked about what auditory processing is and what it affects and how this kind of disorder can wreak havoc on somebody's life. what can cause it, right? There's a lot of different things that
Mhm.
can cause this. Is there anything else people can do to overcome this? Anything maybe that's not on the website specifically or is not, let's say, more medical in a way? Something that how we can connect with other people and tell them about this? Is there something else that we can share, either as a person who may have problems with this or somebody we know, we love, or just people in general? What else could you advise us for that? Outside of
Oh,
medical
okay.
things, what can
Okay.
we as people kind of do to help ourselves, help each other? Is there anything else
Yeah.
that we can do? Mhm.
So, I mean, the one thing I like to say is like just becoming aware of auditory processing and what it is and how it's impacting you can be huge as well, because then you know even how to help yourself even before, you start pursuing interventions that are corrective. Just knowing, oh, okay, like I can't tell you how many teenagers I've worked with are like, oh, okay, so I'm not dumb.
Mm.
I just need to access how I learn more visually at this point. So just knowing how your brain works at this point, whether you're gonna, shift that or not, is immensely important.
Mm.
Or letting people in your family know. I would say 80% of my clients are children, but whether they're children or not, yes, the moms know, okay, when I'm talking to little Johnny, I have to break those instructions down one at a time and so forth. So just knowing that that has to happen. And so if you're the person with auditory processing, telling the people around you, look, I have auditory processing disorder. And so if you give me like five things at once, I'm probably not going to
Mhm.
remember it. If you
Mhm.
write it down, that's going to help me a lot.
Mhm.
So just first of all, being self-aware of how it's affecting you and what you need, and then basically asking for your needs to be met,
Mm.
can really help take some of the stress out of how it's impacting your life.
Mhm. Oh, another speaking of quick stories. So here I am living in Mexico, right? My roommate speaks English and sometimes we speak French. Very rarely do we speak Spanish. But I have friends that come over and we'll watch something in English and I just always have the subtitles on. And they think I'm putting on the subtitles for them. And I think they get a little bit
Right.
insulted and they're like, "I don't need subtitles." I'm like, "It's not for you, it's for me, sorry." It's it's
Right.
something that I don't think enough to say out loud because
Mhm.
I'm so
Yep.
used to accommodating for that, but just saying
Yep.
these things out loud and maybe more often, I think might be more helpful.
Right, exactly. It's like, I was talking to an adult recently who has auditory processing disorder, but also, has that, ADHD or ADD, that hyper focus.
Mm.
And has since tuned into it and told their family, "Okay, like, if you notice that I'm getting really sucked into something, I'm not even stopping to eat, please, please make me aware of that, like,
Mm.
help me with it." So
Mhm. Yeah, I have trouble with the meals thing too. I just get really into what I'm doing, and I don't know if it's related to the autoimmune issue, like, I don't experience hunger very often. I've found that over time, I just don't feel very hungry, so I don't have that physical, reminder, and, I don't know if this happens to other people, but I have to be reminded, "When was the last time you ate?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't It's definitely something I experience. And you mentioned something also that was interesting, how things we're exposed to, they might damage parts of our auditory processing, at least the biology of it. Is there anything else that we can be aware of? What we eat, what our toxicity might be, what we might be exposed to? I know we can't really look at that ourselves, but is there any other
Mhm.
considerations that we can just kind of think about and be aware of?
There's definitely research that points to, if there's gut issues,
Mm.
that can affect auditory processing. So I will bore anyone to death about the biology of that,
Mhm.
but, you know, the brain is just another organ in the body, and I like to remind people of that.
Mm.
Because it's really easy for us to think, well, how could what's going on in my gut affect what's going on in my brain? Because it's another organ in the body. A lot of us, I think by now, have heard about the brain gut connection.
Mm.
So, the brain gut connection is huge. And a lot of people that I work with, once we improve and heal their gut, that can improve their auditory processing. So, as you know, you're on the AIP diet.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, to anyone listening, you don't have to do the AIP diet to heal. Maybe it can be helpful. Maybe that's your path, but it doesn't
It's a
mean it
bit
has to be.
hardcore for some, yeah.
It totally is hardcore. Yep. Um, so just doing things like being more conscious, how much sugar am I eating? Am I eating
Mm,
too many excess carbohydrates? Am I getting enough protein? Am I eating foods that are nourishing to my gut, like, I don't know, bone broth
Mhm,
or
mhm.
sauerkraut or ferments or
Mhm,
whatever, right?
mhm.
I always tell people this is not like new age nutrition, as some people coin gut healing. It's
Mhm.
stuff that our great grandparents did as part
Yeah.
of their normal way of living a long time ago, right?
Mhm.
So if we just go back to what we call an ancestral diet, we can really improve our gut health in that way alone.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, definitely, definitely. And what about, coping strategies, and we can end with this, any kind of other strategies or mechanisms that people might be able to do if they don't have the diagnosis, let's say, but they suspect like, "Oh, I'm having trouble with this. What are some ways that I can manage some of these things?" Do you have any thoughts on that?
Letting people know your best friend is a notepad, because also, I don't even know if I mentioned this, a big part of auditory processing definitely can be poor short-term memory.
Mm.
Again, the short-term memory is on the left side of the brain, long-term memory is on the right side of the brain. So, definitely writing stuff down or typing stuff in your phone is really, really important.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
would say that one is huge. Um,
Yeah, I'm the queen of Post-it
and
notes. I've got Post-it notes everywhere. I've got reminders on my phone. If like everything is on my calendar because I can't remember what I need to do, but then I think, well, I don't have to remember it. That's why I have a phone. Like I have this thing in my pocket that can do all of this for me. So yeah, I've
Mhm,
definitely learned to rely a lot on that. And even this week, I think it was last Wednesday, I was supposed to pay rent and I went over and I paid rent. I know that I did because it's in my phone. And if it's not in my phone, it
right.
doesn't get done, and if it's in my phone, no problem. But then I
Mhm,
was thinking on Friday, did I? Because I couldn't remember if I actually
mhm,
had. But because I have
right.
everything really automated, like, I know that I did, but I checked, and she's like, "Yeah, of course."
Mhm.
So, it's the same for me.
Yeah, I would definitely say writing things down is your best friend. Tapping in or capitalizing on that, most likely the fact that you probably have an overdeveloped visual cortex.
Mm.
Use that to your advantage,
Mhm, mhm,
use the visual cues, all
mhm,
of that type of stuff
mhm,
100%. And just the other thing too, because attention issues and hyperfocus is such an issue often with people auditory processing, sometimes literally putting timers into your phone
mm,
to force you to remember to go take a break
mhm,
to eat or to drink
mhm,
the water or
mhm.
whatever, so
Yeah, it has to be in my calendar, and also, my water bottle is always right in front of me, so
right.
those are it's really nice to hear. To me, it's very hopeful to hear like, "Oh, I'm already doing some of these things, and I was never told to do it, but I kinda figured out what worked for me along the way."
Right.
So I think that gives other people hope too, that they can kinda figure out a lot of this on their way, because it seems to me like this is not the kind of thing that you go to medication for, right? It seems like you're looking at changing habits, it's looking at how you're eating things, what you're consuming, and this is really the answer. Would you say that's true?
Definitely. Definitely what I call the biology of learning, and then um that functional neurology piece in terms of, our brain has an incredible ability to change and adapt if we stimulate it in the right way. So if you can access that, um, you know, it can make life easier. Some people can completely overcome it. Some
Mm.
people, to a certain degree, but there's definitely a lot of potential that in ways that it can make life a lot easier for sure.
Yeah, and I feel like there's some little things in there that's gonna make me say like, "Oh, I gotta ask Lorraine about that." Oh, I feel like we're gonna have another episode about this. So keep in mind anything about
Mm.
language or
Yep.
English as a second language, like learning the language
Right.
and deciphering. For me, it's often like, like in Spanish, it's often like because the syllables are different, the syllable stress is different, like I
Right.
have to kind of change my strategy for
Yep.
that, if that makes sense. So if there's anything you
Totally.
notice,
Yeah.
we can have another
Yeah, I
discussion
think
about that. Uh-huh.
yeah, totally. I know that the minute that, people who are learning just their language, right?
Mm.
Like, say, a 6-year-old or 7-year-old is often might be in speech therapy for
Mhm.
auditory processing disorder issues. So, definitely now adding in a second language, yeah, that's definitely going to be that much harder for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah,
So,
or if we learned it as adults, how we process that
right.
auditory stuff might be
Hmm.
very different as well because, things
Yeah.
change too. And then if you learn in a school versus if you learn, in a different way or something like that, also your learning modalities and things like that. So I feel like we have another episode that's already
Okay.
written itself if that's something you're up for, we can talk about that later.
Okay.
Mhm. Mhm. I think that's a great
Hmm.
place to end because it's full of hope, and
Hmm.
we know where to go. We know to go to your website. We know that we can start with that,
Mm.
And to me, that's just like a lot of hope right there. I want to thank you so much for joining us today and talking about auditory processing and auditory processing disorder.
You Yeah, thank you for having me.